They voted for you, right?
They did, and one of the things that I said in my campaign is that I would be a guardian of the Constitution, and I may not be able to stop nationalized health care or things like that, but there's potential in the future that in this nationalized health care that they say that they will fine people for not buying insurance.
Yeah.
Well, potentially, then, if you don't pay the fine, where could you end up? You could end up in jail. Well, is it constitutional that we are required to buy health insurance and then a fine as a result of that? Well, I think not, and I think through the courts that'd probably be worked out. But it could ultimately come down to a sheriff saying, I'm not going to incarcerate somebody for not buying health insurance.
That would be locally extremely important for the entire country.
So,
yeah.
there's an example of where a sheriff could step in and say, it doesn't matter what a judge has said or a law said, we're not going to do this. And, in our form of government, our republic form of government, we have the law enforcement, or the sheriff is part of the executive branch. And so if you have the legislature that says, well, you need to start arresting black people, well, that's unconstitutional. I'm not going to carry that law out. So it's all in place to provide checks and balances, and every elected official takes that oath of office, which is extremely important, so that we're all supposed to protect the Constitution, and that's been
I have a
not
question
happening
concerning the Constitution. Oftentimes when I'm talking to people that have maybe very little understanding, or they just can't get their mind around why Americans are so, what's a good word, enthusiastic maybe about the Constitution. For example, in France, there's a constitutional bloc. I'm not even sure everyone knows or anyone knows what all is in this constitutional bloc. I studied constitutional law in France, and I don't know. So, in the US, it's just a short written document with a few amendments. And even the European Constitution was longer than that and more complex. But they say it's old, it must be outdated, there's weird stuff in it, like the 3/5 of a man sort of idea that some people get. How do you explain, if you're talking to a foreigner, for example, why it's so important in America?
It's important because that's what our country was, that's the founding document that our country was formed on. And with that, we have a republic. It's not a democracy. You might say it's a democratic republic, but it's a republic nonetheless. A democracy is where majority rules. You have a majority rules that says it's okay to punch you in the nose, then if you get a majority, you're going to get punched in the nose and it's going to be legal.
Yep.
With a republic, there's a rule of law that says, well, no, there's certain things that we're not going to permit, and there's certain freedoms that we have that are built in. They're inalienable rights that are given by God that we're not going to abuse. And the Constitution, you mentioned it being outdated, but the Constitution has within itself the ability to be revised or amended, as you would suggest. So if there are things, as life goes on, there are things that can be changed, and has been. For example, the voting age it
used to be 21.
21. Now it's 18. Different things. Even women voting and things like that. So there's been some real positive changes, and I think necessary changes as time goes on and as society changes and so on. But to suggest that it's outdated in its entirety or should be scrapped, as a Supreme Court justice has said recently, if she said that she wouldn't even look to the Constitution if she was trying to start a new country or something like that. So and here's a person who's taken an oath of office to defend that Constitution.
Yeah,
So that's a bit odd. And so, again, the Constitution within itself, and I think it's Article 6, says that every elected official, every servant in the government needs to take an oath of office to defend that Constitution. Well, that's the foundation for our country. So I can understand people in another country questioning that and thinking it's a little bit odd, but that's fundamental to America, and it's unfortunate though that we've gotten away from teaching that Constitution in the United States in schools and so on, and that's why you occasionally see homeschooling as a growing entity in the United States, so that they can teach fundamental things like that.
I'll remember that next time someone asks me. It's a good explanation. All right. I had another one I was thinking of from an international viewpoint. What exactly does a sheriff do? Because speaking as an outsider, the only sheriff I would have known if I'd lived my own whole life in France would probably be the sheriff of Nottingham. See what I mean?
Yes.
So that's completely different. Or maybe a sheriff in a western who's just shooting a lot of people. That has nothing to do with what you do.
That's a great question. The sheriff is a constitutional office, meaning that in Indiana, in the Indiana Constitution, it talks about the sheriff being an elected official, and in Indiana we're bound by 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, so the maximum I could ever serve.
Like president.
8 years, exactly. And but the sheriff in the United States is the highest elected law enforcement official in the United States. He is only his jurisdiction is only in a county, and sometimes they call them parishes or counties, and but they're the highest law enforcement official ever elected. And so in that particular county, he is the chief law enforcement officer in that particular county, even though you have chiefs of police.
Yeah, I was wondering what the difference was.
The chief of police is appointed by a mayor.
Oh, okay. So it's for a city specifically.
And it's typically a political appointment. So if a mayor is Democrat, he'll put in a Democrat chief of police or somebody who's like-minded.
Okay.
And whereas a sheriff, although it's a political office, again, once he's elected, he's a sheriff of everybody, and you really don't focus on that whether somebody's a Republican or Democrat after they're elected, in essence, because you still have duties. The sheriff will take care of the jail, which some sheriffs have a 50-bed jail, and others, like mine, I have 1,000 beds. So there's a big task depending on which county you're in. But I have sheriff's deputies that work for me that run these things, and
you used to be one, right?
I used to be a sheriff's deputy. In fact, I used to be in charge of the jail. So I was under another sheriff, and then I would be in charge of the jail. Of course, I had people working for me within that jail. And then the sheriff typically operates the law enforcement functions within the county that are outside the municipal limits. So, for example, if somebody calls 911 and they don't live within the city limits of any municipality, then the call comes to us and we respond to it.
Oh, okay.
And then we are also, by law, instructed to arrest felons. So if we have warrants that come to us from various courts, we go out and arrest those people and incarcerate them. And we're peace officers. We're here to keep the peace. And then I go back to my oath of office that as a sheriff, I'm also a guardian of the Constitution in this county. So where I see really grave injustices in that regard, I can step in and be the interposer in that particular situation. So those are basic functions of the sheriff.